So this is where, like, this is what technology kind of does, is that the sensory overload kind of like short circuits us. And so we're sort of, there's like all these kind of technology like conflictingly does things to our brain. So it stimulates some parts of our brain, it exhausts other parts of our brain. I'm just going to check TikTok for 5 minutes before bed, right?
I am just going to check TikTok for 5 minutes before going to bed.
And the irony here is that this is a TikTok about checking TikToks for 5 minutes about bed.
I am just going to check TikTok for...
Let's keep going.
What you know about rolling down in the deep end? I have depression. What you...
Yeah, right? So it's kind of wild because, like, I know it sounds sort of weird, but we've got a phone here that's designed to help you limit your phone usage. And we've got TikToks on TikTok with, a ton of likes that are designed to raise awareness about how you can get sucked into TikTok. And I know it's kind of weird because, like, it's almost like, the internet is becoming self-aware in terms of these things. Like, we're starting to recognize that we can actually use the platforms for good instead of evil. That phones can actually be designed to help you limit your technology usage. That TikTok can be a platform that can actually be used to raise awareness about how addictive TikTok can be. And so I know it's kind of bizarre, right? Even like when we talk about what we do here, it's like we can use a Twitch stream to help people who are depressed because they watch way too much Twitch, right? We can make a YouTube video about spending less of your time watching YouTube videos about motivation and actually doing stuff. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's my firm belief that if we're going to tackle these problems, we actually need to use these tools at our disposal. That to a certain degree, you have to fight fire with fire. That abstinence only is not really going to be an effective strategy when it comes to technology. Because you can't not have a phone, right? You can't stay off the internet. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. Maybe you can pull it off. But for me, it's hard anyway. And I think for most people, it's hard. So what we're going to have to do as individuals is we're going to have to figure out, okay, how are we going to like actually do this, right? How can we develop limits around the technology that we use? How can we use technology? How can we use some of these things to raise awareness about the problems that they themselves are creating? And because that's the only way that it's going to work, right? And I think generally speaking, if you look at historical like wars and stuff like that, if there's a tech imbalance, you're probably going to lose. And what you really need to do is use that tech for your favor. Got to fight fire with fire. So I thought that those were kind of interesting because it's sort of like self-referential and aware. Feels kind of MC Escher-ish to me. Anyway, let's take a look at some more. So this one I think is really cool. So I think this is from a psychologist.
Could I interest you in everything all of the time? A little bit of everything all of the time. Apathy's a tragedy and boredom is a crime. Anything and everything all of the time. Could I
So we'll watch that one more time.
all of the time. A little bit of everything all of the time. Apathy's a tragedy and boredom is a crime. Anything and everything all of the time. Could I
So this is actually really important to understand. Part of the reason that it's hard to get off of these content platforms is actually because there isn't a consistency of what you get, right? So like every time, my poison of choice is Reddit. And every time I click on a Reddit post, I don't really know what I'm going to get. Right? Is this going to be a Reddit post that I'm glad I clicked on? Or is it going to be a Reddit post that's a little bit of a waste of time? And so this is a psychologist that's talking about partial reinforcement or random reinforcement, which is also a big part of why gambling happens. So there are lots of studies that basically show that if you can predict a reward and there's a consistency that gets you to a particular reward, you're less likely to engage in the behavior. So for example, like if I'm playing an MMO, and I am looking for a piece of loot, If there's an RNG component, I'm more likely to engage in the behavior. And this is the big thing with loot boxes. So if you look at what companies do, right? So they'll institute loot boxes instead of just letting you pay for like a cosmetic item. So instead of just paying $50 for a particular cosmetic, what I have to do, what they sort of discovered is that if I spend $50 on average and I'll get the cosmetic, they can actually engage my behavior more if it's on average. And some people get the cosmetic at $20 and some people get the cosmetic at $70. So most people get it around $50. And what they sort of figured out is that if we make it a random reinforcement schedule, it's more likely to engage in the behavior. And we've seen this with rats as well. So a lot of studies on rats that basically like every 4 presses of a lever, you get like a little hit of cocaine. So they'll actually use cocaine when they do rat studies. But if there's a 25% chance of success, you're more likely to press the lever if you're a rat. Because what happens is sometimes you hit the lever and you get the cocaine. You hit it again, you get the cocaine. You hit it again, you get the cocaine. It's like 100% success rate 3 times in a row. And that experience lodges in your brain and reinforces the behavior. So this is also something that I think we're sort of seeing in content aggregation platforms, is that interestingly enough, you're not guaranteed to enjoy what you watch. And it's that kind of lack of guarantee which sometimes makes it really, really, really positive and that you really love, and sometimes it makes it really, really negative. So you're trying 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, no reward. And you get frustrated to the point that you may think about stopping. But if the reward schedule is too low, then you will stop. But this is just a dry spell. If you keep going, you're gonna get what you're looking for. So it's really interesting how this works. There's one other thing that I want to bring up with y'all, which is that we also see this actually as a reason why abusive relationships persist. So a lot of times people are super confused about, I don't understand like why this person doesn't leave an abusive relationship, right? It's because like this person mistreats you. Like, I don't understand why you're in that relationship. And if you talk to the abused partner in a relationship, what do they say? Oh, but you don't know the real person. They're just like that sometimes. Sometimes they can be so sweet, they don't really mean to, right? So people don't usually stay in abusive relationships that are consistently abusive. What they stay in are in relationships with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where depending on the day, you can get the person who you fell in love with or someone who's incredibly toxic. So we can even see this partial reinforcement. And if you yourself have been stuck in an abusive relationship, or if you stayed in an abusive relationship for a long time, ask yourself, why did you stay? It's probably because the person that you were with wasn't like that all the time, right? Sometimes they were sweet. Sometimes they were caring. Sometimes they were compassionate and supportive. And so what you're doing is you're hoping that over time, they'll grow more into that person, right? You're hoping that like they'll be less toxic over time and like more awesome over time. Whereas the truth is that unfortunately in abusive relationships, what we tend to see is the opposite. That as people recognize that I'm not going to be punished for my bad behavior, the bad behavior comes out more and more and more. Because early on, and this is sort of from the perspective of an abuser, which may be in our audience as well, you may have noticed this, even if you don't think of yourself as an abuser, that as you sort of let your temper out, as you kind of like let go a little bit and become a little bit toxic, if your partner doesn't set limits on that, what you may find yourself doing is giving into that more, right? You give into it more, you give into it more, and then you find yourself turning into a person that you don't even want to be. So it's interesting because this random reinforcement schedule is something that's like a fundamental part of how our brain reinforces behavior. So it's the kind of thing where like, it's just the way we're wired. So we'll see things like gambling explicitly take advantage of this. I think these content aggregation platforms or social media or things like that, I don't know that they're quite as predatory as gambling is, but it definitely sort of is a factor there. We even see it in video games. So there's an interesting study that was done many, many years ago, which sort of discovered that the reason that video games are addictive is not because of the reward, it's because of the denial of the reward. So why are From Software games so damn satisfying to play? Because they're so friggin' hard. So when you finally beat Melania, Blade of Mikola, Why does it feel so good? It's because it was so hard. And if you think about it, fighting against that boss is a random reinforcement schedule, because sometimes you do pretty well. Sometimes waterfowl dance doesn't come out very often. Or sometimes because of the RNG, you manage to roll out of the way and you kind of handle it okay. And you're kind of fishing for that RNG, that confluence of events where they don't use the moves that you don't really know how to dodge. And as long as you can get them to use the moves that you do know how to dodge, eventually you'll win. So we see it in relationships. We see it in abusive relationships. We see it in video games. We see it on social media. So be aware of this principle. Be aware that it's part of the way that your brain works. And the more awareness you have over it, the better control you'll have of it. And for those of you who haven't played Elden Ring, apologies for the deep, deep reference. Someone saying, so Dark Souls fans are abuse victims? Sort of. But I think it's interesting because I think I remember seeing something about Miyazaki's design philosophy. And a part of, I think, how they make the game is he was talking about he has to channel his hatred or something like that. I'm misquoting this. But he channels a dislike for the end user. He tries to punish you. But I think what makes it so cool, that's what makes it so triumphant, right? Is that at the end of the day, the game is designed to be hard and punishingly hard. And at the same time, the game has a lot of, it's such a beautiful game design because you can play it whatever way you want to. You can run around naked with a short sword and you can still beat the game. So it's beautiful because he equips you with so many things to overcome the sadistic stuff that he asks you to beat. Does that make sense? Right? Because I don't think it gives you so many tools like Mimic Tier. Right? So if he really wanted to, be abusive, they just wouldn't have put Mimic Tier into the game. But they did. And that's great. Okay, let's keep going. So, there's a lot about this that I think is really significant. One is, I like this TikTok because of the discrepancy between the facial expression and the lighting. Oh, whoops, sorry. So this is where this is what technology kind of does, is that the sensory overload kind of short circuits us. And so we're sort of, there's all these kind of technology conflictingly does things to our brain. So it stimulates some parts of our brain, it exhausts other parts of our brain. And I saw a really interesting post recently where people were asking, why is exercise healthier than stimulating the heart through caffeine, right? Because when you exercise, your heart rate increases, and that kind of heart rate is healthy for you. And when you drink caffeine, your heart rate increases as well. But why do we think about heart rate increasing from caffeine as being different or not as healthy as heart rate through exercise? And the reason for that is because our body is like a whole organism, right? There's a whole concert of different things. And exercise does a lot more than just stimulate your heart. It also increases your respiratory rate. It alters your CO2 levels. It alters your O2 levels. It does all kinds of other things. It affects blood pressure. You see muscular contraction. And the cool thing about muscular contraction is that the veins in your legs move that blood back to your heart through the movement of your muscles. So this is why walking is really healthy for you, because if you kind of think about it, how do we transport the blood from our calves back to our heart? We have to push it against gravity. And the more that we move our legs, the more that we contract our calf muscles, the more we push that blood back. So you sort of get like a bunch of stuff when you exercise happening all over your body, which all is very healthy because that's the way the body was designed. Enter caffeine, and it's sort of this isolated effect. Doesn't do anything to your respiratory rate, doesn't do anything to your muscular contraction in your calves, doesn't do anything to your venous return, doesn't do any of that stuff. It just targets one part of the heart. And what we're seeing with technology is sort of the same thing, where if we look at being stimulated in sort of a healthy way, let's say we go to a party even, right? When we go to a party and there's music there and we're having a good time, we get all kinds of influences on our brain. We get social exposure, right? There's the empathic nature of, even when we were talking to Charlie earlier today, if I change my facial expression versus if I do this, right? Facial expressions will create, like, notice what you're doing right now. Chances are you're smiling. Like when I started smiling, like you started smiling. And so when we go to a place like a party, there's all kinds of stuff that's going on for our brain. We're engaging with people, we're talking to people, we're like having good conversations, we're maybe feeling a little bit anxious, we're overcoming that anxiety and falling into a conversation, right? So there's all kinds of different stuff that happens in a natural setting. When we use something like TikTok, especially depending on what kind of, TikToks you look at, we're going to get more of like a caffeine-like effect. We're going to get sort of this isolated effect, which is not nearly as healthy. So you'll get bombarded with all this like high stimulus, like, sound and light and like all these different songs and entertainment and all that kind of stuff. But what it's going to kind of do is like veg you out. It's going to fatigue your mind. It's going to fatigue your eyes. You'll get sort of some amount of emotional suppression. So we sort of know this as well, that like different kinds of social media and video games and technology are going to have sort of paradoxical effects on your brain. So on the one hand, they kind of numb out negative emotions. And over time, it appears that prolonged use, even though in a short term, if I watch a funny TikTok, it's going to numb out my negative emotion. But when I spend hours and hours and hours on some kind of content platform, even though each individual video seems to be numbing me out a little bit, over time, my mental health will globally kind of get worse. So what we kind of see is it's almost like overwhelming and stimulating kind of at the same time and paradoxically. So be super careful about that. So I see that someone's, Ligum Bra is asking, so would reading be similar to the use of watching something or playing it? So I think reading is a good example of something that's a little bit more globally effective. It's like globally harmonious in the way that it kind of calms you down. You can still read an exciting book that's going to keep your attention, but the way that the book affects you physiologically is going to be like somewhat different. So your eye strain is going to be different. Even the amount of kind of like UV, the wavelength of UV light that a book is going to be giving you is going to be different from a screen. So there are all kinds of other things that are involved with books as opposed to screens that are going to sort of affect your brain in different ways. Yeah, books are OP. So Twitch too, right? So this is where like, it's not, I mean, hopefully this isn't turning into bashing TikTok, which once again, remember that all this stuff is coming from TikTok. So that's like pretty cool, right? So Twitch is something like each of these content platforms is going to have their own balance of pluses and minuses. So what I love about Twitch as a platform is that it allows you to form connections with other human beings. It is a platform that involves engagement, right? We are not responding to the people who are making TikToks. What I'm doing is I'm talking to chat, which is fantastic. That's why personally I love Twitch as a platform, because I like to engage with people. So one thing that I really hated about the pandemic is all of my teaching became virtual. I love teaching a group of like actual people. Like it's so much fun. And so what's awesome about Twitch is that we can like develop some amount of relationships. It turns out that the poison is actually the same thing. The downside of Twitch is that we can develop relationships, right? Because sometimes those relationships get out of control. These parasocial relationships become kind of bizarre. We start to really like connect with this person on the internet, and that relationship will never be reciprocal. It's not capable of being reciprocal. It's not how the platform is designed. So we feel close to people, we feel connected to people, we can genuinely be inspired by people, which is all fantastic. And at the same time, there's a lack of reciprocity, which is sort of how we just can't fix that problem, right? It's just the way that Twitch is built. And I don't think that it was built that in a way to try to create that in a malicious way. It's just, someone came along and realized like how awesome would the internet be if content creators could directly interact with people, with their audience. And the truth is it's awesome. Like I love it. Like even this question that I'm answering, This Twitch allows for this kind of connection. It allows for this kind of interaction. And if we're not careful, that parasocial relationship can actually impact your real life relationships. You can start to feel more connected to streamers on the internet. You can start to neglect your real life relationships because you're spending too much time watching streams, right? That it's kind of bizarre, but I think that what the internet is and what all these content platforms are is they're fire. And fire can be used in all kinds of amazing ways, and it's incredibly dangerous. So we need to just be super careful about all of these different influences on our mind. Questions? Isn't that the same with a live audience? Sort of. So here's the big difference. So when you're with a live audience, you can interact with them, right? There's some amount of connection. There's definitely interaction. But here's the difference. When you're part of a large audience, okay, great, fantastic question. When you're part of a large audience, what is the duration of your relationship? What is the duration of your relationship with someone on Twitch? Right? Think about that. How are those things different? So I gave a talk yesterday. Really loved the talk. It was one of the best experiences for me as someone who goes and gives talks. I really loved I loved the questions. I loved interacting with people, all that kind of stuff. I also personally liked getting and receiving hugs. Giving and receiving hugs. So that was nice to be able to do. But the challenge with in-person live audience interactions is that the duration is short. It's limited, right? Maybe you'll have something like a professor who you can build a relationship with over the course of several lectures. But if you go and give a talk, let's say you go to a university because there's a talk being given by someone. There's 300 people there. And so you can do some back and forth, but then it ends. What's different, what's both good and bad, this is why we're playing with fire here on Twitch, is that you can always come back and the streamer's always going to be there, right? Not always, but they're going to stream every day, 3 days. We stream 3 days a week. A lot of people stream 5 days a week. People stream for a long time. So the time span that you have to develop that parasocial relationship is way longer. And then it can start to feel more connected, right? And so it's different. It's different. And then what we sort of see is that when you have a quote unquote live audience that's persistent over time, that's when you form real relationships. So you may have gotten, there may have been a professor, you really enjoyed one class, you went and took a second class, you got to know them somewhat, they start to become a mentor of yours, you all form some kind of lasting relationship that's healthy and wonderful and all that good stuff. Hopefully no abuses of the power dynamic there. But that's the big difference, is that the Twitch relationship is a lot easier to maintain. We didn't evolve an intrinsic understanding of the bizarre disconnect between real life and internet life, says Flatbug. Completely agree. So it goes even one step further. We didn't evolve to understand the distinction. It goes one step further than that. The internet has evolved to take advantage of and activate the circuitries that are active in real life. Right? That's actually how it evolves. So this is something I want all y'all to understand. The internet is undergoing a rapid rate of evolution. And we're not evolving to it. It is evolving to us. So if you want to understand this, all you need to do is look at content platforms and look at the evolution of social media. We used to have MySpace. And then Facebook came along. And Facebook allowed for more connection, more interaction, more of a network, right? Because that's what people wanted. Facebook was more connected than MySpace is more connected. And then social media evolved even further. So text messages turned into Snapchat, right? And then we sort of developed WhatsApp groups because the internet sort of figured out as people made 1,000 different applications and 1,000 different startups, the ones that were the most aligned with our current neurocircuitry and psychology were the ones that blew up. We also see this in terms of content. So there used to be blogs, right? There are still blogs. And people would like sit down and they'd like write stuff out, right? And it would be like well thought out. And then you'd publish a blog post. And over time, what does that become? People sort of realized, oh, it's more emotionally engaging if I make a vlog instead of a blog. Because there's facial expression, there's color, there's light, there's sound. There's so many things that are much more engaging than reading stuff. So along came the video content. And even the written content. So what we realized is, oh, written content is boring. It doesn't hold the attention as well. So what happened to the written content on the internet? What is the most popular readable app or internet service? Right? It's Twitter, I think. And what's different about Twitter? Twitter blew up because it was restricted in how short it can be. And so what Twitter sort of figured out is that the way to get people to engage consistently, the best engagement with written content is going to be if we keep it short. Reddit, I think, is another good example, right? And so are we seeing that similar thing happen with video content? So people used to make vlogs and video essays, and they still do. But what are the most popular channels on YouTube, right? And what TikTok figured out is, oh, it seems like the most popular channels on YouTube tend to be shorter in nature, and people really like short content. So let's make a platform that's all about socially engaging, short, segmented, emotionally engaging content. And thus TikTok was born. And that's what all the kids are using nowadays. So I don't think things are going to get much shorter than that, by the way, because I think we're sort of discovering where the sweet spot is, and that's what's sort of happening. So technology is evolving to adapt to our brain, and people are making all kinds of different stuff. And you even see this in terms of video game development, right? Oh yeah, someone was mentioning Vines, right? So Vines is a good example of that. People started making Vines, and then it became TikTok. So even if we were talking about From Software and Miyazaki and stuff, right? So what's cool is like, why is Elden Ring so much more noob friendly? It's because there are all these built-in difficulty modifications that aren't done in settings. Like if I'm losing against a boss, I can just go explore another place, upgrade my weapon 2 more times, and go back and fight the boss. And suddenly I've modulated the difficulty. I can choose to use summons or not use summons. So what we sort of discovered is that like, the more that we adapt to what people want, these are the technologies that are successful. And I think so far, I think this has been done honestly in a pretty unsophisticated way. So we know that, for example, game developers will employ things like behavioral economists. They'll, to a certain degree, employ psychologists. But I think that I think that there's a lot that they haven't even touched. And so crypto is actually a good example of this, where I've sort of looked at crypto for a while and analyzed the psychology of it. And there are 12 or 13 discrete psychological principles that are at play in crypto. We made a video about a couple of those, but there's a lot more there. And I'm sure that what's going to happen over time is people will make cryptocurrencies that activate these different things or sort of take advantage of them. And then those cryptocurrencies will be more successful. And so we're just getting started. So be careful. And also you can sort of see the evolution. So it's not that we didn't evolve to tell the difference. It's that the technology that's being developed is being developed to shrink that difference, right? Those are the things that are the most successful. Why is Twitch so successful as a platform? It's because it adds the element of interaction to the internet. Why is Discord so successful? Because it allows for interaction. It allows for community building. It allows for all this kind of stuff. Great question. Yeah, healthy coin. I mean, this is going to be an exaggeration, but once a week, someone reaches out to us asking us about, hey, do you want to start Healthy Gamer Coin? Or NFTs or something like that. It's not literally once a week, but it happens a lot. Okay, should we keep going? Anyone else get so overwhelmed by something that they go on TikTok for a break, but then nonstop scrolling just makes them even more overstimulated? 100%. Right? And this is the challenge, is that like, so let's understand the neuroscience of this for a second. Why do we take a break on some of these platforms when we feel exhausted? And how do we feel more tired afterward? It's interesting, right? So this kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about understanding the amygdala and the hippocampus. Limbic system. So the limbic system and the amygdala are emotional circuits of the brain, especially the amygdala is responsible for fear and anxiety and our survival emotions. And so what happens is we've discovered how to self-soothe. So human beings are really good at sort of figuring out what calms down their emotions. So this is where sometimes if we sort of discover, I don't know if you all have like a friend who every time they're stressed out, they give you a call and they like talk to you and you're like the therapist friend. So you kind of like talk them down a little bit and they calm down and they feel better afterward. And then what happens the next time they're upset? They call you. And then over time, you fall into the role of the therapist friend. And so they start to use you as a way of emotional decompression. Maybe you're guilty of this and you use other people for emotional decompression. And so when that happens, like human beings will figure out what works for them. And so this is also what happens with substances, right? So if you're like 13 and you're, struggling because you like someone at school and you tried asking them out and they laughed in your face and everyone else around you laughed because you had the audacity to ask them out, whereas really you made them uncomfortable and they didn't know what else to do but laugh. I don't know if they're actually that malicious, but it hurts a lot. And then you're hanging out with your older sibling who's getting high with his friends, and then you get high too, and what happens? All that crap goes away. You feel so much better. And so what happens the next time you feel upset? You've got a solution that's going to take it away. So that's what happens, right? So we've sort of discovered that if I laugh at memes for a little while, then I'll feel emotionally better. Now, the challenge that we run into is that even if I laugh at memes for a while, there's another long-term, more global effect on our brain that these different kinds of applications are causing. Stimulation, riling us up, right? Because what gets propagated, it's the emotionally activating content. So you may see stuff, you may see some parents like crying about losing their children and stuff like that. You're going to see like other kinds of stuff about the Russia-Ukraine war. You're going to see stuff about, this cat that lost a leg that is now able to walk on one foot, or you're going to see all kinds of like random, like emotionally charged content. And it's going to be all over the place too. So on the one hand, you're kind of numbing yourself up. And on the other hand, you're kind of like activating yourself and like emotionally engaging yourself. And so what you're left with is kind of this like a very unnatural emotional activation and an unnatural emotional suppression. So it's sort of like doing uppers and downers at the same time, right? So there's something that back when I was doing a lot more addiction psychiatry, sometimes people would use something called a speedball, which is they'd inject heroin and cocaine at the same time. Do not do that. Do not use drugs, kids, seriously. And so that's what we're doing. Technology has now become somewhat of a speedball. So like when I sit down and I play a video game, that both calms me down and pisses me off. Do y'all get that? Like think about it. Like I'm going to play a game to have fun and relax. And after 3 hours, it's going to be like, I don't understand. I don't understand why I play this game. Right? It's kind of weird. But that's what it does. That's literally what it does. Because it activates some circuits of our brain, it suppresses other circuits of our brain. And why isn't that healthy? Like, so all those circuits getting activated is actually healthy. Like, but you have to activate them in a natural way, because then they all get activated together, and that's okay. And if you look at sort of the way that emotions, rise and fall in a healthy situation, let's say that, your friend gets dumped. And then y'all get together, y'all have a good cry, they tell you what happens, you have a good cry, you're feeling all that negative emotion, you hug each other, you say some inspiring words, I'm so sorry you're going through this, all this kind of stuff. And at the end of it, like, both of you feel tired, but you feel good about it. You feel light. You feel like you've let something off of your chest. So it's not suppression, it's like processing. So when our brain handles emotions in a more natural way, like, there's more processing involved. And when we handle emotions through technology, all we do is suppress it. And as we suppress it, what happens? It comes back roaring again and again. So when I'm afraid that I'm not going anywhere in life, and I manage that fear through video games, what happens when I stop playing the game? Fear just comes roaring back. Or, this is a lot of people in our community are going somewhere, are actually very successful. So if you're at your job and you're afraid you're going to get fired because you made a mistake on an important project, same damn thing. Load up a video game, forget about the problem for a little while because it's so terrifying that your career could come to an end. You're an engineer at one of these highly coveted positions. You're making a bunch of money. And like, what if I get fired? And then you go log on to the video game and you forget your worries for a little while. And then you wake up the next day and you got to go to work and you're terrified of what your boss is going to say. You get a message on Slack. Hey, can you swing by my office when you have a second? You're terrified. Can you come by in the afternoon? You go on your lunch break. What do you do on your lunch break? You grab your food, you grab your phone, and you veg out for a little bit. Right? So it's not, you don't have to be successful or unsuccessful. That's not the important thing. The important thing is what's happening in your mind and how do you respond to it? And what role does technology play? What role do these platforms like Twitch and stuff play? Right? Okay. So we're going to maybe take a look at one more, okay? Yeah, so this is important, right? To understand. So you've got a lot of potential. You know what you need to do. And that's the problem. Is that there's a lot of stuff that you got to do, right? But why is it so easy to engage in the technology? Why is it so easy? So this is important to understand. If we look at why fundamentally technology is addictive, a big reason that it's addictive is because it offers you the same rewards that you would get from real life, but at a cheaper cost. Same reward, but easier. So if you log on to Twitch, you connect with a streamer, they laugh, you laugh. Dr. K makes a facial expression, you make a facial expression. You get that empathic connection. But it's easier to do because you don't have to leave the house. You don't have to shower. You don't have to do laundry, right? You don't have to sit in traffic. You don't have to worry about like whether that one person that you don't like is going to show up or not. And if this is horrible, but we've been hearing about this more and more recently. In your friend group, your ex isn't going to be like, if you have a friend group and you now were dating someone from your friend group and now they're your ex, every time you go hang out with the friend group, the ex is there. So you don't have to deal with that if you form an empathic connection with someone on the internet. If you have a friend on Discord, it's so easy because if you screw up, you can just block them. You can ignore them. You never have to do any kind of damage control in a relationship. It's just easy to find someone else to connect to. So the challenge with technology is that it gives you the rewards. Like in your brain, it gives you the rewards without going through all the effort. And we see this in video games as well, right? So like we'll see this a lot where people will say, I don't understand why I can grind on a video game and like really try to be like one of the best, top 200 players in the world, but I can't bring myself to study for school. Like both of them are a grind, but I can do one very easily. I can grind on like this video game for 12 hours a day and try to be the best at something. But I can't do that when it comes to like being the best at, writing haikus and like studying English literature. I don't understand. Because being the best is important to me. I get a lot of value out of it. And that's where that's why the games are successful. Because they give you that reward of achievement. Right? This is one of our oldest videos, back when Dr. K was a small childer who first showed up on the internet. We posted a video, like one of our oldest videos on our YouTube channel, about the triumph circuit. And the whole reason that games are addictive is because they give you that sense of triumph. They give you that difficulty with the reward at the end. And what our brain has learned to value is not easy things, but hard things that we can win at. That's the sweet spot. If it's too easy, it becomes boring. If it's too hard, it becomes overwhelming. Both of those lead to a lack of motivation. Both of them tank your motivation. Why are you motivated towards video games and not motivated towards the other parts of life? It's because the rest of life is either overwhelming or boring compared to video games. And this is the key thing to understand, is that now your brain has option C. It's not which one do I want to do. Do I want to be boring or do I want to be overwhelmed? Because if it's IRL, like those are your two options, right? Either I go to the party and I feel socially anxious for an hour before I kind of get into it and have a good time, or I stay home. I have no social exposure, no social anxiety, but then I'm going to feel bored and lonely. Those are the options. IRL. And then technology gives us option C. There's Twitch, there's Discord. You get all the conversation with none of the social anxiety. And then your brain is like, yes, I'll take that one. So you can study hard and it's going to be boring and you'll get an A at the end, which, by the way, you're going to get the A at the end of the semester. So there's going to be a huge delayed gratification. And by the way, when you get an A in a class, how long do you feel good? How long does the happiness from getting an A in a class last? Compared to 60-minute game of Dota. Enemy has mega creeps. You're about to lose. You wipe them in a heroic defense of your base. Run it down mid and win the game. There's no way getting an A in a class is going to reach anywhere near that level of thrill. Anywhere near that level of triumph. And how hard do you have to work to get that? You just have to sign up for a Dota game. You don't have to go to a whole semester, hours and hours and hours at the library before your reward. Right? You don't have to do that. So the reward happens so much easier. The other interesting thing is, what if you're running it down mid after wiping them in your base and they've got mega creeps? Their throne is at half health, and then their creeps are in your base and you lose the game. You don't even win at the end. It's a base race and you lose. What does that do to your motivation? Do you say, screw this game, I'm never going to play it again? No, you queue right back up. Right? Go next. Next time, it was so close. I could taste the victory. Let me do it again. I could taste it. It was so close. Now compare that to real life. What happens if you get an 89 in a class? Got a B. Are you like, great, awesome, next time I'm going to get an A? Queue up, go next. Let's jump. I want to skip the summer break. I want to go right into the next semester and I'm going to crush it. I'm going to get an A. Why did I study so hard for an 89? I could have spent half the time at the library playing twice as many video games, and I would have gotten an 80, would have been the same damn grade. Waste of my time tanks your motivation. So if you all want to understand, like, why is it different? Why can I do this in a game, and why can't I do it in real life? There it is. Because here's what's happening. People are figuring out, right? Game developers are figuring out. I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's predatory. I mean, maybe some of them are. But I think they're just figuring out what makes, because if you're like a game designer, right? Like, think about this for a second. What do you want to do? You want to make a fun game. What makes fun games? These razor-thin moments. Epic saves. Epic wins. Rubber band mechanics. Because you're trying to make a fun game. You're trying to make a game that people will enjoy. So I don't blame them for it. So what should we do, right? At the end of the day, like, what's our responsibility? I think our responsibility, like, so you can blame everyone if you want to, okay? Really, you can. You can say, like, oh, and we hear this a lot from parents especially. Why doesn't someone do something about it? Why doesn't someone ban the video games? Ban all the video games. Stop them. Take the developers to jail. They're addicting my kid. I don't know that you can alter the world to make your life easy. I don't know if you can do that. But what you can do is, like, be aware, right? You can do things to set yourself up for success. You can do things to help yourself set healthy boundaries. And I'm not kidding. Like, part of the reason, I'm serious, like, the reason that we took this sponsorship with OnePlus is because they actually have a device that, like, helps you set limits on your device. Right? So there's, like, tools out there. You can do things to set healthy boundaries. You can uninstall stuff from your PC if you need to. You can also, like, be more aware of, like, what the game does to you. You can limit the amount that you play. And you may say, like, limiting, it's so hard. But, like, think about this for a second. If I'm going to play 10 hours of video games, is the amount of fun the same during all 10 hours? No. The first couple hours are fun. The last couple hours suck. You don't even know why you're playing. So just be aware of this stuff. And the more that you become aware of it, the easier it'll be to set boundaries. Like, literally grab a piece of paper. And if you play video games for 10 hours a day, write down 1 through 10 for each hour that you play. And next to each number, just look, like, rate each one. So how much fun did I have over the last hour? On a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the most fun I've ever had in my life. 1 being absolutely awful. And just do that for a week and look at the numbers. And then ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? Like, what's going on here? Be aware of what's going on. And when you ask yourself why I'm doing this, the answer isn't there's no reason to do this. No, there's a good reason to do it. That's why you're doing it. And raise that awareness of yourself. And as you become aware of it, you'll gain power over it. So here's the last thing I'll leave you with. Awareness precedes control. Everyone is trying to think about how to control things. How do I change my behavior? How do I control my motivation? How do I do this? Everyone's focusing on the action or the behavior. How do I transform my life? Awareness precedes control. If you want to understand this very, very well, hopefully y'all have had, or I don't know about hopefully, but if you've ever had a situation where you've, like, had a part of your body that's been numb. So oftentimes for, like, dental work, right? They'll numb some part of your body. And then what happens when you numb it? You can't use it properly. Your control over it disappears. And so then you, like, talk all funny, right? And they tell you not to eat because you're going to bite your lip. Or you'll bite your tongue or whatever. And so before you're aware of something, you can't do anything about it. So awareness precedes control. In medicine, this is also good diagnosis precedes good treatment. Sort of similar. So be aware of what you're doing and then do the best that you can to set up situations where you can sort of like move in a direction to like account for these things. And that's where I think ultimately a healthy relationship with technology comes from. Because this stuff is here and it sounds like it's here to stay. And at the same time, like we don't have to despair because it's here. It can be a tool for good. It can be a source of enjoyment. It can be a source of social connection. Even during the pandemic, I was really surprised to discover that a lot of times, like, the gamers were the ones who were doing the best because we were the ones who had relationships that were virtual that sustained us for years. So I know that was definitely the case with me, whereas, like, we had a game night, like, easy, fantastic. We've been doing this for years, right? So we were able to keep some of those connections. So don't be afraid of technology. It's not evil, but respect it. Understand that it is playing with fire. And you can accomplish a lot with it, but if you're not careful, you're going to get burned. Okay? So just a reminder that this is a segment of a sponsored stream. We're going to actually wrap up. So we're being sponsored by OnePlus, which is a phone company. And part of the reason that we took this sponsorship is because the OnePlus phone actually has features that are designed to limit your use. So they've got Zen mode, they've got work-life mode, they've got these different things that you can do that will sort of disable notifications or allow some notifications in and out, so that if you are in work mode, like, you know, you'll get some things that are work-related, but you won't get things that'll distract you from work. So this is exactly, I think, what phones need to be doing or what tools we need to develop. And so that's kind of why we took it. The other cool thing is that OnePlus has been kind enough to sponsor coaching for y'all. So that's another thing that we tend to look for from our sponsors, is we want people who are actually willing to like help our community as opposed to just help us. And so we're grateful to them. So you can use the command !giveaway if you're someone who's looking for coaching, whether it's career coaching or group coaching where you want to like practice social skills and things like that, or you're like looking to get life purpose, understand yourself better, like try to figure out why you're struggling with motivation. All those kinds of things are what we sort of do with coaching. And if that's something that you're interested in, you know, use the !giveaway command. And the last thing is what we're grateful for is we also recognize that there are a lot of people in our community who may not be able to afford our coaching services. Part of what we really do believe in, though, is that our coaches are not volunteers, that you know, they get compensated for the work that they do. And so thankfully, OnePlus is offered to sponsor some of those coaching packages. So that's why we're doing this.